couldn't let the mystery of Mrs. Crowley and the mannequin go. Night after night, she found herself returning to the abandoned house, drawn by a morbid curiosity and a deep-seated need to understand what she had seen. She began researching the history of the house, poring over old town records and talking to anyone who might have known Mrs. Crowley. She learned that Thomas Crowley had been a renowned craftsman, famous for his lifelike mannequins. He had poured his heart and soul into his work, imbuing each creation with a piece of himself. The town people whispered that Thomas' mannequins were so realistic because he used arcane methods, blending his craft with dark, ancient rituals. One night, armed with this new knowledge, Sarah decided to confront the mannequin one last time. She waited until midnight, when the figure would be visible in the attic window. The air was thick with anticipation as she approached the house, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. As she climbed the stairs, a cold dread settled over her. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if an unseen force was trying to hold her back. When she reached the attic, she found the door ajar, the mannequin standing in its usual spot, staring out the window. Taking a deep breath, Sarah stepped into the attic. The room was deathly silent, save for the faint creak of the floorboards beneath her feet. She walked up to the mannequin, her flashlight casting eerie shadows on its lifelike features. "Thomas," she whispered, hoping against hope that some part of the man still lingered within the creation. "What happened to you?" For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the mannequin's head turned towards her. Its glass eyes seemed to glow with an inner light, and Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She knew she should run, but she couldn't move, rooted to the spot by a strange, otherworldly force. Suddenly, the air around her grew colder, and she heard a whisper, soft and mournful. "Help me." Sarah's heart raced. "Thomas," she asked, her voice trembling. "Free me." The whisper came again, clearer this time. Gathering her courage, Sarah reached out and touched the mannequin's hand. It was ice cold, and she could feel a faint pulse of energy beneath the surface. She closed her eyes and concentrated, trying to connect with whatever spirit or force was trapped inside. Images flashed through her mind. Thomas Crowley working late into the night, his hands crafting the mannequin with meticulous care. Evelyn Crowley standing beside him, watching with a mix of love and fear. And finally, a dark ritual, Thomas' soul being bound to the mannequin as a last-ditch effort to escape death. Sarah understood then that the mannequin wasn't just a guardian or a protector, it was a prison. Thomas had trapped himself inside to avoid death, but in doing so, he had cursed himself to an eternity of watching over an empty house. "I'll help you," she whispered, feeling tears stream down her face. "I'll set you free." With newfound determination, Sarah searched the attic for anything that could break the spell. She found an old, leather-bound book, hidden in a dusty trunk, filled with notes and diagrams in Thomas' handwriting. It detailed the ritual he had used and, more importantly, how to reverse it. As she prepared to perform the ritual, Sarah heard footsteps behind her. She turned to see Mrs. Crowley standing in the doorway, her face a mask of sorrow. "You can't do this," the old woman said, her voice echoing with an otherworldly resonance. "He chose this fate to protect me, but he is suffering," Sarah protested. "He deserves to be free." Mrs. Crowley's eyes softened. "And what about me, dear? Without him, I'm lost." Sarah realized then that Mrs. Crowley's spirit was also bound to the house, unable to move on without her husband's presence. She would have to free them both. With a deep breath, Sarah began the ritual, chanting the words written in the book. The air around her crackled with energy, and the room grew darker. The mannequin's eyes glowed brighter, and Sarah could feel Thomas' presence growing stronger. As the final words left her lips, there was a blinding flash of light. When Sarah opened her eyes, the attic was empty, the mannequin was gone, and so was Mrs. Crowley. Exhausted but relieved, Sarah made her way downstairs. As she stepped outside, she glanced back at the house one last time. The oppressive feeling was gone, replaced by a sense of peace. She knew that Thomas and Evelyn were finally together, free from their earthly bonds. The house stood silent and empty, no longer haunted by the past, and in the quiet of the night, Sarah could almost hear a whispered "thank you" carried on the breeze.